How many miles can you get out of a Triumph Speed Twin if you completely drain the tank to empty? And what happens when you run out of fuel? Well, today we're going to find out because I'm going to ride my Speed Twin 1200 as far as I can until it completely runs out of fuel. And to make things interesting, I'm going to see if I can ride across 5 countries on a single tank. The plan is to start in my home country of the UK, get the Channel Tunnel train to France, then head through Belgium and Holland before crossing into the closest part of West Germany I can find and finding the nearest petrol station. The good news for me is that those countries are all fairly close together, but the bad news is that my bike has a tiny 14.5 litre fuel tank, the fuel light usually comes on at 140 miles, and the distance from my entrance point in France to the petrol station in Germany is 206 miles. So if I'm to succeed in this challenge, I'll need to cover a further 50% of what the bike thinks its range is after it tells me to stop for fuel. With the weather set fair then, I set off for the Channel Tunnel. I left just before 8 AM, which would give me plenty of time to complete the challenge within a single day. And on day 2 of this trip, I'll be touring through the Ardennes forest in Belgium, which I'll cover in the next video, so make sure you subscribe for that. Now, my original plan was to fill up at the Esso petrol station at the Channel Tunnel crossing point in the UK, which would then mean I'd only have to ride a few hundred feet along the UK leg of my journey from the petrol station to the train. And when I googled it before I left, I found a review that said you can access the Esso station from both the entrance and exit of the train port. However, when I got there, it turns out you can only access that petrol station from the Channel Tunnel exit and not from the entrance. And actually, the last petrol station in the UK was 6 miles short of the Channel Tunnel. Because I was booked in for a fixed departure time, it was too late to head back there, so instead I added a 6-mile penalty to the challenge, which now meant I had to cover 212 miles instead of the planned 206. Now, assuming I'm able to completely brim my tank, that meant I had to average over 65 miles per gallon, and my average consumption before this trip was 58.8 miles per gallon, which would leave me about 25 miles short of my target. I filled up at the petrol station right at the exit in Calais with the bike upright to get as much go juice in as I possibly could. And because I didn't fancy being stranded with no fuel in a foreign country, I filled up my 1 litre emergency fuel flask, which I then strapped to my backpack. Now, I don't have any luggage on this bike, so bringing a backpack felt like a good idea at first, but including the flask, it weighed in at about 9 kilos or 20 pounds, so it actually turned out to be a terrible idea, more on which later. Now, while I had plenty of beautiful scenery and fun roads ahead of me, the first leg of the journey was actually pretty boring, and it turns out that parts of northern France are not as exciting as you might expect. In fact, on the first leg, the most exciting thing I saw was this sign for Belgium that meant I was about to enter my 3rd country of the day with just Holland and Germany left. But with nothing more than some boring motorways for now, we're going to skip ahead to the first stop so Vlog Alex can tell you how the challenge is going and give you a comfort update. Okay, first stop report then. I've just stopped for lunch. It's about 1:30, 1:45 local time, and I've been riding for a total of about an hour and a half in France and Belgium, plus an hour and a half this morning. First leg of the journey to the UK, to the ferry port, but the train port was totally fine, no problems. Second leg, I'm already feeling a little bit tired. The bike is actually totally fine, but that backpack, I thought I'd packed quite light, but it turns out that even a tiny bit of weight on your back is not much fun, so my shoulders are aching. However, more importantly, let's have a look and see how we're getting on in terms of miles for the challenge. So the trip says 64.9 miles, so we've done 65 miles since getting off the train in Calais in France, and we are averaging, what's the fuel economy? 70.4 miles to the gallon. Now, 70 miles to the gallon sounds pretty good, and it's above the target of 65, but I'm going to need that credit in the bank later for when the roads get a bit more nadgery and I can't conserve fuel quite so easily. However, so far it's going pretty well, and I'm on course to do it. I'm on course to beat the challenge and do 205 miles and have a single tank of fuel on that. I've got about 140 miles to go, so the plan is to stop here for lunch, have one more stop, and then do the final leg. So I'm going to go and grab some food, and I'll see you in a sec. After taking the opportunity to recharge my batteries, both figuratively and literally, I set off again for what was supposed to be the second of 3 legs, although that plan would shortly go out the window. And while I had now completed the brief stints of this trip through England and France, I now had to schlep all the way across Belgium before I'd get to my 4th and 5th countries of the day. Although, to be fair to Belgium, the scenery here was a big improvement on the roads heading out of Calais. While I was of course keen to beat the challenge, there's no point riding a motorbike at 40 miles an hour all day, so I just rode however I felt comfortable. And in fact the main thing that stopped me going faster was the lack of wind protection. And on an open road like this, there was quite a lot of wind blast at anything above 70 miles per hour, and as much as anything, I was finding it really noisy inside my helmet, even with my earplugs in, so I didn't fancy going any faster. Now, no self-respecting Brit would make a video like this without spending at least 50% of the time talking about weather, so how was it for my trip? Well, given the sunshine and blue skies, you might be thinking this was the perfect road trip weather, and to be fair, my main concern when planning this was the potential of having to ride through hours on end of rain, which would have taken the chocolate out of my waffle. But instead of rain, I found myself in something of a heat wave, which was actually quite draining. And while I didn't want to have to use the waterproofs I'd brought with me, I was actually relieved to find this section of wet road, which meant that I just missed a small downpour because suddenly the air temperature dropped by a good 10 to 15 degrees, and while that only lasted 5 or 10 minutes, I really needed that to cool me off. But despite the brief cool patch, I decided to cut the first leg in half, down from 120 miles to just 60 miles to give myself a break. Alright, I've made the second stop, and this is a little bit earlier than originally planned because it's getting hot here. It's 31 degrees at the moment. It's not going to get any cooler for the rest of the day, but it's getting hot on the bike. I do have this summer jacket which is really helping, but the temperature is making me a little bit lethargic, which is not a good condition to be in on a bike. So I stopped for a bit of a break and to grab a drink and freshen up a bit. Let's check in on the status of the challenge though. Alright, so here we are on the map then, and we are just over here, which is just outside Brussels, literally a few miles outside of Brussels. 137 kilometres is what we've got left, and that is about 80 miles, 85 miles, something like that. We have done 120 miles so far, and fuel economy is 72.6, so it's actually picked up a little bit after the last stop. Now the guessometer thinks we've got 66 miles left, but we all know that's not right, and it's got loads more than that. I find when I go above 70 miles an hour, the fuel consumption starts to increase and it drops below 70 miles per gallon. So I'm going to try to keep it at around 70, which is roughly what I've been doing, but I'm not holding back, and if I need to accelerate, I just give it the beans. So I'm not actually making a particular effort to go as quickly, as efficiently as I can. That's just kind of coming around. The other thing I should mention in terms of heat is that this bike is getting really hot as well. 31 degrees temperature is hot enough, but the bike, wow, that engine kicks off some heat. You notice it when you're around town in England, but over here when it's a bit warmer, you notice it even on the motorway. Anything kind of below sort of 50 miles an hour, you really feel that heat. So what I'm trying to do is stay a little bit quicker to keep the heat off the bike. In terms of comfort, the bike is actually doing okay. My knee bend isn't ideal, it's a little bit, my legs are a little bit less comfortable than I'd like, but my back is totally fine in terms of the seating position. Despite the fact that it's quite a sporty position, it feels all right, so I'm feeling good in terms of the bike. But man, that backpack was a mistake. It's feeling heavy, it kind of pulls at my shoulders, and because it's on my back as well, it means that there's no ventilation, like natural ventilation for the heat to escape from. So the backpack is what's causing me the issues at the moment, and I would sacrifice my firstborn to Lucifer for some panniers right now. What else would I want to say? Yeah, cruise control. I love cruise control. It's fine and my wrist isn't aching, but it's just a bit uncomfortable, and I'd really like to be able to press a button and just set it at speed and stay. Apart from that though, I must be 4 or 5 hours into the day now from where I started in the morning, and actually comfort wise, apart from the backpack, the bike is fine. It's not the most comfortable bike in the world, it's not the best bike for touring in the world, but actually it's doing okay, and I think if I had panniers I'd be pretty good and I'd be feeling a lot better. Anyway, look, I'm going to jump back on now, and I'm going to try to do one more leg before I stop. Yeah, the sat-nav says 2 hours 10 minutes, so I think if I split that into 2, that's probably right, and that'll give me a little bit of a break to stop me getting too tired. So I'm going to jump back on the bike now, and I'll see you again at the next stop. Before I set off on this challenge, I wasn't sure how economical the 1200cc engine would be on this bike, given the Speed Twin has the high power version of the Bonneville family engine. I knew I could get more than my pre-trip average of 58, of course, but 72.6 is way higher than I expected, and it turns out this engine bloody loves sitting on the motorway. It pulls less than 4,000 revs sitting at 70 miles an hour, whereas my 800cc V-Strom touring bike pulls just over 5,000 revs at 70 miles per hour. Ain't no replacement for displacement. Given we are now in the hottest part of the day though, I was keen to keep my speed up to keep the air flowing over both my jacket and the engine. However, Belgium had other plans for me, and I'd found myself in rush hour traffic, which meant my gentleman vegetables were getting a bit of a roasting. But thankfully it wasn't long before I was away from the traffic and into a much more scenic part of the route, and it's fair to say that East Belgium is a lot prettier than the roads around Calais, and probably the prettiest part of the journey so far. And even though I was essentially just sat on a motorway for hours on end, I was really starting to enjoy the trip. Any day on a motorbike is a good day of course, but a completely free day like this, combined with a mini adventure overseas, and the prospect of a day's fun riding ahead of me tomorrow, just put me in a really good mood, and I was already having an absolute blast. Although part of that was down to my nervous energy around the fuel range. While the MPG was looking good on paper, I got to the point where I found myself checking the fuel gauge, then the distance remaining, pretty much every few minutes, and it didn't help my nerves that the fuel light came on much earlier than I expected. And on that note, things were just starting to get interesting, so I pulled over at a service station to fill you in on the challenge and of course give you a comfort update. Okay, we are now at what I like to call the squeaky bum time update. The fuel light came on, well, it's been and gone, it came on a while ago, it came on with about 60 miles left, so let's have a look and see where we are on the fuel gauge regarding the challenge. Location wise then, we are here, which is just outside of Zonhoven in Belgium, and we're not far, about 10 miles short of Genk, and here is the Holland-Belgium border, and there is the Germany border, so I'm really close. We have got another 54 kilometres to go. What's that in miles? About 32 miles, something like that. We have done 176.6 miles. The fuel light came on, like I say, 30 miles ago. It was with 60 miles to go, roughly like that. And the guessometer reckons we've got 17 miles before we run out of fuel. And what all of that means for the challenge is that once the bike thinks we've got 0 miles left, I'll still have to do about another 15 or 20 miles, something like that, which I think is certainly doable. If I've done the maths right on the MPG, I'm way above the 65 miles to gallon. And the only question now is there actually 3.2 gallons, a full 14.5 litres in that tank? Even just a few hundred millilitres could make a big difference here. And it's funny, the reason I call this a squeaky bum update is because you really get nervous. When that fuel light comes on and the bike thinks you've not really got much further to go, that's when you start to think, am I actually going to make this? And it makes it just a completely different situation, and it gets you more excited. In terms of comfort, by the way, I've done three things, or there are three things I need to tell you about since the last stop. At the last stop, I changed the backpack. Before I set off, I loosened the backpack straps off, so the weight of the backpack was on the chair, on the seat, rather than actually me carrying it, and that made a big difference. I should have done that earlier. That made a real big difference. I would still rather not have a backpack, to be honest. I'd rather have panniers, but that's really helped, and it just means there's a tiny bit of strain on my shoulders, but most of the weight is on the bike. Two other things. Heat. Man alive, this bike gets hot. I've been sat in traffic, really sort of stop-start traffic, doing 5 or 10 miles an hour sometimes for what felt like half my life. Felt like an eternity. It was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. And man, the bike got so hot. My calves were on fire. I actually stopped at one point to check there wasn't something wrong. It was getting that hot. So this bike doesn't do very well in hot temperatures, and it's 31 degrees when you're going in slow traffic. What was the other thing I wanted to tell you? Yeah, music. So actually, I was genuinely feeling a bit lethargic at the last stop. It wasn't good. So I put some music on to entertain me. I don't normally ride with music on, but I put some music on in my helmet, and that's made the world of difference as well. I actually felt instantly a lot peppier, and even though it's still really hot, I actually feel a lot better now just having some music to listen to. So I'm going to keep that on all the way till the end of the challenge. But anyway, I'm really keen to get back on the bike now. I want to finish this, and I want to get to those last two countries and get to my final destination. So I'm going to jump back on the bike, and I will see you, hopefully, when I've won the challenge. I set off again with 33 miles left to win the challenge, plus of course the 6 penalty miles for my first missed fuel stop. The bike said I had 17 miles left, which means I would have to cover an extra 22 miles after the range goes to 0, and it wasn't long after I set off again that the fuel range finally zeroed out and the bike said I had no miles left. 0 miles left, 194.1 on the trip, 20 kilometres left, which is 12.12 miles. However, I got a little dose of excitement as I crossed into my fourth country of the day. And away from the challenge for a moment, even though I was still on boring roads, the scenery around this part of Belgium and Holland was absolutely beautiful. And one thing I was loving about this trip was the ease with which you can cross through countries. There's no borders, no passport checks, just a sign with the country's name on it and you're in. And given I was travelling through the smallest tip of Holland, it wasn't long before I was into my fifth country of the day on a single tank of fuel. Bundesrepublik Deutschland! I made it! I'm in Germany. Yes! I'm in Germany. Look at that. Yes! Now the challenge wasn't just to get through 5 countries, of course, and I still had to eke out a few more miles to get to the petrol station I'd earmarked. So I was deep into squeaky bum time, and as I said at the start of this video, I needed to cover 212 miles, including the 6 penalty miles. Given I was due to run out of fuel at any minute, I was feeling a lot more comfortable now I was off the motorways, and if I ran out now, I knew that I could at least easily pull over without putting myself in harm's way. But despite the jeopardy at this point, I actually felt completely relaxed. The worst of the heat had passed, and I was left to enjoy riding my motorbike around some beautiful German countryside on a mini European tour. I'm a man of simple pleasures, and for me it doesn't get much better than this. But scenery aside, would I make it to 212 miles on a single tank of fuel? Well, let's hand over to Vlog Alex to find out and to give you a final comfort update after a full day in the saddle. Final report then, and ich bin in Deutschland, or however you say I'm in Germany. I made it all the way. And by the way, the stopping point I've chosen, this is absolutely beautiful, just a farmland. Everywhere around here is like this. It's a place called Cantor, South Cantor, something like that. It's just all beautiful around here. Parts of France and Belgium I've been through today have not been that pretty, but Germany and the Netherlands just look fantastic. They're stunning. And actually, I've been driving around here a little bit more than I needed to, given that I've made it to Germany, just because it's so beautiful and the scenery is just so picturesque. Anyway, look, I'll come back onto that, but let's quickly do the final rundown then on the fuel stats. Okay, so 215 miles so far, and by the way, I still haven't run out. There's still a tiny bit left. What have we got in terms of the fuel consumption? 73.2 miles per gallon. That's incredible. My average before this trip was 59, so a real boost. And of course the guessometer stopped being relevant a long time ago, but there it is showing that we got 0 miles left. Actually, to be fair, for the first time, it's probably not far off. Anyway, I made it with a trusty old steed all the way through 5 countries on one single tank of fuel. I'm going to keep going, and I am going to completely run out just to see exactly how far it can go. I think I'm pretty close now, 5 miles or so, maybe 10 miles if I'm lucky, but I think we're more or less there. Let's now do a quick final comfort report at the end of day 1 before I wrap up. All right, comfort wise then, we're going to start with the seating position. So the bike is kind of tilted down, and that really is exactly how it feels, kind of a bit face down, arse up, but it's been fine. Backpack aside, as we've talked about endlessly, it's been absolutely fine. And actually I don't have too many aches and pains. My shoulders are a bit cramped and my knees are a little bit stiff, but it's totally fine. And actually my apprehensions about this bike being not comfortable enough to go touring have proven to be probably a little bit unfounded. I have found myself sitting at kind of 60, 70 on the motorway. Anything faster than that starts to get really windy because you are bolt upright like a sail. But 60, 70, totally fine. And it just means that you probably cover distance a little bit slower than you would do if you were on something with a bit better wind protection. Suspension wise, the suspension's been pretty plush and pretty comfortable. It is still a little bit harsh because it's a sporty suspension setup, so it doesn't soak up bumps as well as I might like, but it's totally fine, and that's really nitpicking. And what that does mean is that it's going to be fun when I have to go to the twisties tomorrow. The seat, this is not a very comfortable seat, I'm afraid. It's not very much padding in there, and I find myself shuffling around straight away. All the time on that, I find the seat actually pretty uncomfortable, to be honest with you. It is nice that you can go all the way back, so you can shuffle back and forwards a little bit, so that does make it a little bit easier on your bottom, but every time you shuffle backwards, it makes the reach to the handlebars a little bit further, which makes it more uncomfortable. So, you know, the seat is not especially comfortable, but it's been okay. I can live with it. In terms of comfort then, I think that's everything you need to know. So I'm going to jump back on the bike, see how long it takes me to run out of fuel, and head back to my hotel and rest up for the night. So I officially made it then, 5 countries and 215 miles on a single tank of fuel, all on a sporty retro bike with a tiny 14.5 litre fuel tank. And of course, given I'd gone this far, I was keen to see exactly how many miles I'd get to empty and to see what happens to the bike when you finally run out of fuel. On my V-Strom 800 and MT10, both bikes started coughing for a few miles before finally conking out and shutting down. However, that was not the same with the Triumph, and it gave me no forewarning whatsoever and instead just died out of nowhere. I emptied my Oxford fuel bottle into the tank to give me enough range to get to the nearest petrol station, then filled the tank up at a Shell station at a village called Selfkant just inside of West Germany. And as a nice little Brucey bonus, when I watched the footage back, I caught this young lady checking out my arse. Still got it. My final average fuel consumption then was a hugely impressive 72.4 miles to the gallon, and I managed to cover a barely believable 229.8 miles. The fuel range dropped to zero at the 194 mile mark, so I managed to go just under 36 miles after the bike said I had 0 miles left. And while the challenge was in the bag, the tour was only just beginning, and I had a full day ahead of me in the Ardennes forest in Belgium. That video will be next on the channel, and I'll tell you a little bit more about getting across the channel and into France, and of course I'll take you with me around the twisties. So make sure you like and subscribe to see how that went, and post any questions you have down below and I'll make sure I get back to you. And until next time, ride safe.